Greetings sailors and welcome to a Tirpitz replay, and it's one of mine this time. This is a slightly older one. It's from patch 6.11 I think it was, and that's relevant because the smoke changes hadn't happened yet, which is going to become very pertinent later on. Now I've chopped out like the first 4 minutes, I fired a couple of shots. But really the only relevant thing you need to know about those first 4 minutes is the team has basically split north and south, which is not great, but is not going to be as disastrous as it sometimes can be. And actually the greater part of our team is to the north, so they can at least hold their own for a little while, because if the enemy team tries to push into that C cap point, they're going to have difficulties. So they're going to have to wear down our teammates first, or my teammates rather. One of the other things to know is that my Tirpitz captain, aka now my Bismarck captain, is, well, was my first 19-point captain. I've now got 2 of them, but they're spec'd in kind of a funny way. I have manual secondaries, manual AA, and AFT, which doesn't leave a lot of points for the lower rank captain skills, but those 3 in combination on a German battleship are pretty nice, especially since, and this is going back a ways, but especially since the Tirpitz was buffed to have the same base secondary range as the Bismarck, so as a captain it works very well on both. And heck, I use this captain in the Scharnhorst and the Graf Spee as well, because manual AA on the Graf Spee is actually not totally terrible, but you really need defensive AA to make it work. So I spawned to the south, which is why I've come to this cap. We've actually got A and C, so we've got a nice points advantage at the moment, and whilst the enemy team isn't going to prove to be terribly, like, they're not horrible players by any means, but yeah, this is not really a tenable position for them in the long term. They need to either, you know, kill a lot of our ships very quickly, or else take the sea cap, which is where basically all of their team is, apart from a destroyer that is already running for our Ranger, and I think that was the destroyer that actually capped B. Talking of Rangers, well, there's the enemy one, and at this point I get maybe a little bit distracted, because there's a Gneisenau right there that I could also be shooting at. And don't get me wrong, shooting at the Ranger, trying to take out the Ranger is not necessarily a bad thing, but there's very little chance that I'll be able to do sufficient damage to this Ranger in the time that it's going to be spotted for it to really make a difference. I'm certainly not going to get to kill this Ranger. However, if I was shooting at the Gneisenau and doing a bit more damage sooner, that might have been, in retrospect, a bit more useful. And I will say, if you're watching this game and at times thinking that's not particularly good shooting, or that wasn't a particularly great target choice, you would be justified. This is not a textbook brilliant battleship game by any means. This is definitely more on the entertainment novelty end of the spectrum, but I do have those kinds of games in the Tirpitz fairly often. It's a very comfortable ship for me. I like to jump into it and bash around in it, and you know, sometimes you get away with things in this that you wouldn't necessarily in, say, an Amagi or a North Carolina. Now this turn here, for instance, you know, the next minute or 2 here, I'm going to be manoeuvring in a rather awkward way. Now it is a Gneisenau, it doesn't have a huge broadside to fling at me, but even so, yeah, I mean, I can only imagine, and this is going back to, what, October, I think 6/11? It was something like mid-October. So not that long ago, you know, Wargaming really does pound out the patches when it comes to World of Warships. I can only imagine that I was thinking that I might be taking a lot of fire from the east, where there's a clump of ships above the sea cap, where they are now finally starting to try and cap it, although they've just lost a destroyer. And indeed, there is a KGV that is starting to come in this direction, but you know, clearly I was being a bit too, I don't know, a bit too hesitant. This positioning is just all over the place. I'm just manoeuvring and I'm starting to do a circle now, and I don't even quite know what I had in mind here. Maybe I didn't have anything in mind. Maybe I was just being completely indecisive. That is entirely possible. However, I am getting a little bit of damage done against this Gneiser now while I'm doing all this awkward manoeuvring, so it's not a complete waste of time, but it's not exactly helping the team that much. It's not really getting stuck in. It's me hanging back and waiting to see what develops, which is not, you know, sometimes that's the right move, but in this case, I'm a top tier battleship. I can afford to be maybe a little bit more aggressive than I really am being, especially as the only destroyer that's left is a Russian destroyer with short-range torpedoes, and the carrier isn't that big of a threat to me because of my captain setup and because I think I've got AA equipment on this. I'm more spec'd for AA on the Tirpitz than I did for secondaries, I think. But, you know, that still means the secondaries are, what, 9 kilometers range? It's over 9 kilometers, I think. Anyway, so, you know, I don't have that much to fear. Although, having said that, now this KGV's popped out in front of me, and this actually might be somewhat bad, because that thing, of course, has monster HE. So it's at this point I start to think, you know, it'd be awfully nice if I had some smoke available. Or at least, you know, I assume that's what I was thinking, because I'm going to be asking for it very shortly in the chat. And the thing with the KGV is it's also got pretty decent armour. It's not just the monster HE. So if he was sailing along broadside, I could do reasonable amounts of damage. But he's angling, he's wiggling around, he's making things a bit difficult for me. And meanwhile, my angling doesn't actually matter that much if he's firing the HE. He's still going to be getting reasonable amounts of damage. He's got a good rate of fire, and of course, he can set fires. So this is actually quite a dangerous opponent right now. Now, I am chipping away some health, but it's not that much. And, you know, he's got to mess up a bit, or I've got to get very lucky for me to take off a significant chunk. Because, you know, as much as I do like the Tirpitz and the Bismarck and some of the other German battleships, the guns are not reliable. They absolutely are not reliable. They kind of make up for it with a decent rate of fire and with a fast shell velocity. But in terms of the actual accuracy, yeah, it's not so good at all. Now, the downside of this, and it hasn't really worked out, is that, yeah, for the better part of a minute, I didn't really have anything to shoot at. So I was safe from the smoke, and I did shoot down some planes, which is, of course, helping out our destroyers a lot, because they're not getting air spotted. But it was only really now that the destroyers were getting back into a position to spot the KGV. And the other thing about the KGV is, and it really does depend on the captain build, you can make it quite stealthy if you've got Concealment Expert. And I, generally speaking, have Concealment Expert on most of my battleships these days. The Germans are maybe an exception. I'm trying to think if I've got any other high enough skill captains on the Germans for concealment. I probably do for tier 9 and 10. I'm not sure for below that, though. Generally, the lower tier ones, I just rely on the tankiness rather than not being spotted. And you can make them reasonably stealthy, but not especially stealthy compared to like the British battleships and the American battleships. So the KGV is engaging these destroyers. The smoke's about to go out, and well, if they land some hits, that'll be pretty good. And if I can land some hits, that'll be pretty good as well. I'm not getting any particularly big damage salvos in this one. And it can happen. It absolutely can happen with these guns. But you are at the mercy of that RNG, the not particularly effective dispersion. So if I can get close enough to the KGV to drop some torps, that'd be good. But there's also a Gneiser now that's coming in from the east at this point as well. So that's okay, that's not so welcome. I don't want 2 versus 1. I want 1 versus 1. Except it's not even really 1 versus 1, because I do have allies here as well. It's not just me firing at this KGB. And it is actually our combined weight of fire and the torpedo hits that is finishing him off. So although I get the kill, and I probably had a reasonable amount of damage, it might not even have been, you know, half his... It probably was less than half of his hit points. So that, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the more dangerous enemy ships that are out of the action. But, well, they still have a division of Bismarcks who are now pushing around from the south. And at this point, I wasn't really paying attention to that. Now, they're not really a threat at the moment, apart from a Miyoko that's more towards the A cap. All that's left of our team is now here, because, you know, our team made a good accounting of themselves, but we are now down on ships. And it has come down to, well, in big part, that Bismarck platoon. I think they were the ones that led the push around through sea and were able to get 5 ships between them. So they accounted for a decent chunk of our team. It's not done yet, however, and this Gneisenau, having taken more torpedoes, is now in some serious trouble. My secondaries are opening up. Sometimes I forget to, like, I think I actually forgot to click on the Gneisenau until he was well within secondary range, because of course that's the thing with manual secondaries. You have to remember to actually select the ship. So although it does make them more accurate, it's not always necessarily, you know, in a situation when there's lots of things going on, you've got to, you know, have one more thing to deal with. So there's those Bismarcks I forgot about, and that kind of hurt. And if I'd been positioning myself a little bit better, if I'd been paying attention to that and angled in a bit more, I probably wouldn't have taken as much damage. The good news for me is, however, that one of those Bismarcks is very low health, so they obviously are going to be the priority. The York is also fairly damaged, and otherwise I'm not too worried unless I get like detonated or something. You know, if the Ognavoy tried to rush me. Is it an Ognavoy? I can't remember. The Russian destroyer. Anyway, if they tried to rush me, that would be an issue. But the main threat here is that the Bismarcks between them would just wear me down. And of course, there's always the chance that now I've lost some of my AA. Although, you know, it's the long-range AA that matters on the German battleships, particularly. Yeah, some of the planes might get through, and that does just come down to RNG. So once again, the Mayhan smokes me, and so, you know, this game's not just about me, it's about our destroyers having done very well as well. I could not have done this, or I could not have done what you're going to see coming up without our destroyers being team players. But unfortunately, of course, it means that really, you know, I mean, I've got a fighter up for a little while, but for me to have any vision here, it has to be the destroyers spotting for me. And of course, they're getting air spotted, and they're at close enough range that they're going to get surface spotted at this point. So there goes the Mayhan, unfortunately, and now it's just me and this Japanese destroyer. But the good news is that Bismarck is just about to go down. Now, the Mayhan smoke has still got ages left to run, but for some reason the Akatsuki starts trying to smoke up as well. I'm not really sure why, but anyway, you know, I appreciate the thought, I guess. I'm not actually sure what happens if you smoke in an existing smoke cloud. Does it kind of like refresh the smoke cloud? Because the timer doesn't seem to suggest that it does. The timer is just ticking down steadily either way. So I don't know. So targeting the planes once again, and if the Akatsuki gets lucky with a torp drop, that'll be useful. The destroyer's making it is an Ognavoy. The destroyer's making a move on the other side. The Akatsuki's probably in trouble because he's going to be getting air spotted, but it does look like the Bismarck is going to take some torps, which is excellent. However, there's the York, and the York actually with their torp drop could be a serious problem. So although I'm hesitant to, you know, like giving a broadside to Bismarck at this close range is not ideal, I'm kind of counting on them focusing more on the destroyer because, yeah, there's the York torps. The York actually gets a set of 2 per side. And of course, he could turn and drop his other side, but I get lucky enough to get a Citadel. And then my own torps find purchase on the Bismarck. And at this point, and I didn't even realise at the time, we've basically won, because we were ahead enough on points, and we had at least one cap circle at all times, that it was one of those games where, yes, the ending was extremely silly and action-filled, and I could not have done it without those destroyers, so all credit to them. But it was the cap control. The cap control is what mattered. And so I was able, because the Tirpitz is a fairly tough ship, to come through that somewhat awkward situation, that's one way to put it, and actually just survive long enough for the points ticker to get to 1,000, despite us having lost almost every ship. But because we were able to take down particularly those two Bismarcks, because bear in mind, of course, battleships are worth more victory points than, say, the York would have been, or the York was, or the cruiser. No, the York was the cruiser. The destroyer, I know what I mean. It's late when I'm recording this. Not that it has to be late or early for me to, you know, have a little verbal derpery. But anyway, yeah, that certainly helped a lot, being able to take out those battleships, and in particular those destroyers, being able to make those effective torpedo drops. Because if it had just been me alone at that point, I would not have fancied my chances. So there you go. It was all about teamwork in the end. And it's always nice when you win a game because of teamwork. And sometimes it feels like it's a rare enough thing. But when it happens, you know, it's to be praised, it's to be cherished, and this is one of those times, I think. And also, you know, it just showcases why I still quite like the Tirpitz, despite having played it more than really any other ship I own. So, there you are. Hopefully you found that entertaining, and if you did, you can hit the like button, leave any comments below, sub to my channel if you haven't already, and, as always, stay tuned for more.